Hello everyone, Panzer J back with a new video. This particular video is going to be on the evolution of Axis and Allies, going all the way back to the first version, the 1984 version. And I'm also going to go ahead and include Historical Board Gaming's Global War 36 and 39. They're not directly in line from the Axis and Allies series. Obviously different, produced from different companies, but a lot of the same principles, and HBG's games definitely owe a lot to the Axis and Allies games that preceded them. So right now we've got set up on this nearest table, Axis and Allies Global 1940. And in back of that, we have Historical Board Gaming's Global War 39. Off to the right, down on that table, is Historical Board Gaming's Global War 36. And then off to the left, we've got Axis and Allies, the 1984 edition. This is the father of these type of games. This is the one that started it all, kicked it all off. As you can tell, taking a look at the map, it's much smaller than the games that have come since then. But everything that's come since then really owes the basic game mechanics, a lot of the same units and everything. Everything started with this 1984 edition. And I remember my first experience with this game. I was probably 13 or 14 years old, so it was around 85 or so. And me and a buddy of mine and his father played the game. And my buddy took on the role of the UK, the United Kingdom, and Russia. And I was the United States. And his dad was the Axis powers, Japan and Germany. And I was hooked after just the first playing of the game. I remember we started playing probably around 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and then had to call the game for the night because it was dragging on hours later, and then we had to finish it the next morning. And I thought that was like really cool, that a board game that could be that in depth, especially for the time, and something that you didn't finish in 20, 30 minutes. I mean, something that could, literally go on and on for hours and hours, even coming back to it the next day. I thought that was really cool. It allowed for a lot of ebb and flow and back and forth, and there'd be a couple of turns that would go your way and you think, okay, well, you're on the road to victory, and then lo and behold, a turn or two later, and then you're, fighting for survival. So I thought that was really cool. So I was pretty much hooked from that first playing of the game. And I remember my buddy's dad had gotten the upper hand, and in this version, the Axis can win by taking 2 of the 3 Allied capitals, or by getting enough territory worth $84. So his dad had hit the $84 mark, and I, as the U.S., the U.S. goes last in each turn. So I had to make a last-ditch effort to take Japan, take Tokyo. So I launched my fleet and my air force. I remember I had a bunch of bombers and, battleships and carriers. And the odds were definitely not in my favor, but he would have won at the end of that U.S. turn if I didn't try. So launched the assault and didn't succeed. So he ended up winning the game, but it was really cool. And been playing ever since. So if you take a look at the board itself, it's obviously a lot smaller. than the games that are out these days. And there's not nearly as many units either. You've only got a couple of ground units, infantry and tanks. And then for air units, you've got fighters and bombers. And then for naval units, you have battleships, transports, carriers, and subs. And that's it. So not nearly the inventory of units that you have available in the current games. Also, as I mentioned earlier, not as many nations are represented. You've only got the big five, the U.S., Russia, and UK on the Allied side, and then Germany and Japan for the Axis. In this game, the year is 1942, so it's also a little later in the war than some of the other games that are out now. In this game, Russia gets to go first, followed by Germany, the UK, Japan, and the United States. And the map itself, there's a few little kind of goofy things here. The territories aren't completely accurate. For instance, we've got Stalingrad over here in this first Russian territory, the Caucasus. And then you've got Russia as a territory with Moscow there. And if you're aware of Russian geography at all, Stalingrad is east of Moscow, not west, and down on the Volga, east and south of Moscow. So on this map, we've got Stalingrad looking to be a territory in front of Moscow. So that's kind of goofy. And some of the territories themselves don't look to be quite as accurate. But again, this is 1984, and really the first version of these kind of games. I mean, what came before this, as far as World War II board games, would have mostly been units represented by cardboard counters. This was really, if not the first, one of the first board games that used the plastic playing pieces to represent the units. And if you kind of look at them a little bit, we'll take a look at a few of the Japanese units here, some infantry and a sub and a carrier, a fighter, a battleship, and a transport. They're not particularly highly detailed, but for the time, it was pretty cool. Like I said before this, it was really Avalon Hill had produced a lot of really cool military board games up to that point, but they were using the cardboard counters. So this was like adding a little bit more flavor, a little bit more detail, maybe a little bit more realism. So this is what started it all, and this is still my copy from way back in the day. The box itself is a little bit beat up, but I haven't played this in, I'm not even sure how long. But this is what kicked it all off, and was very cool, especially for a 13, 14-year-old kid. Then next down the road came Axis and Allies 1940, and this was both Europe and Pacific, and then you could combine the two to recreate the entire conflict. So Global War 1940. And this came out, I think, in around 2005 or so, I believe. I'm not exactly sure on the year, but give or take. And this is obviously, if you take a look and we zoom in a little bit, this was a lot more detail, a lot more depth to the game than what came out in 1984. A lot more units represented. We've got cruisers and destroyers added for naval units. And then for air units, we've got tactical bombers added. And then for ground units, we've got artillery and mechanized infantry included. Also, we've got air and naval bases that were added. So a lot more units were added, as well as you can see, a lot more nations are represented. Over in the Pacific, we've got the Far East Command. We've got ANZAC, the Australians, and we've got China. So 3 additional nations added on the Pacific side of the map. And then over on the European side, we've got France. They're in blue, and the Italians in the light brown. So 2 additional countries. So altogether 5 additional nations to play in Global 1940. And I started playing this. I wasn't aware of it for the first couple of years that it was out, and then happened to discover it. And just like with Axis and Allies 84, I was hooked on this. As I mentioned earlier, I really like my games to take a long period of time. I don't like the quick shorten out. I mean, days would be just fine with me. So I really like a game that you can get into that, takes a good long time, not sure of the outcome. Things could go back and forth. And with Global 40, that definitely fit the bill. This game could go on. I mean, you're probably talking, if you've got good players, or at least somewhat experienced players, you're probably talking an 8 to 10 hour game most of the time, and maybe even longer than that. But you're usually probably talking about a minimum of an 8-hour game. And the sculpts for these units are really cool. They came out with a second edition of this, and the first edition had some pieces that they used the same sculpts for a couple of different countries and just colored them the different colors to represent each country. But in the second edition, they came up with some more individual sculpts. So like the Italians, for instance, in version 2, have actually sculpts for Italian tanks and Italian artillery, Italian ships, and those represent actual units that the Italians used in the war. Same thing with Russia, although the French are represented by Russian units just colored French blue. But for the most part, other than that, I believe each country in the second edition has their own actual tanks and planes and artillery and ships that they actually used in World War II. So that adds some authenticity to the game, makes it cool. I was playing this for several years until I then discovered Historical Board Gamings, which we'll get into those in a few minutes. And now I really haven't played Global 40 in a while. It's still a really good game. Like I said, very cool. Wouldn't mind playing more of it. But like I said, I've kind of gone on to Historical Board Gaming's Global War games, and the Historical Board Gaming, just like Global 40, is a step up from the 84 Axis and Allies. I think both Global 36 and 39 from Historical Board Gaming are steps up from Axis and Allies 40. So the Historical Board Gaming's games will take you even longer to play. More of the unknown, more of the, more surprises, I think, even more depth to those games. So that's kind of why I've gotten away a little bit from A&A's Global 40. And that's not to denigrate the game at all. It's still really, really cool. You can still have a lot of fun with it. It still can fairly accurately represent World War II. But again, I just always looking for something that'll even take it up another notch. And HBG's games definitely do that. And this game also starts later than Historical Board Gaming's Global War 36 and 39. Obviously, as this Global War 40. So you're starting at least a year later. And some of the things that kind of, that I find difficult in the Axis and Allies 40 game is, for instance, Italy is the weakest of the Axis powers, which they should be historically. They totally were. They only start out with $10. So much less economic power in this game. And the other issue is that Italy, their turn is last, so the United Kingdom gets to go before them. And unlike Global 36, which there is no war, or 39, where the Italians aren't actually in the war yet, Britain and Italy are at war at the start of this game. So, and with Britain getting to go first, they're going to come in here, and a seasoned player, even just a fairly experienced player, worth his salt, is going to come in and take out at least one of these Italian fleets, doing what would have historically been the Taranto raid, and take out the Italian battleship and cruiser and transport there. So you've already got Italy as, a fairly weak partner in the Axis alliance to begin with, only collecting $10. So they're not going to really be able to purchase much. And even before they get their first turn, Britain's going to come in and wipe out, half the fleet, including, a couple of their big ships. So Italy usually isn't much of a help to the Axis. So that kind of, and historically Italy was that. It's not like they were a World War II juggernaut by any means. But it just to me, it just makes Axis and Allies 40 just not as fun to play, because Italy really, you really can't do a whole heck of a lot with Italy. Once in a while, I've had a couple of games where Italy, either from good die rolls or whatnot, was able to put up a fairly strong resistance against the British in Africa, and actually, give the British all they could handle. But most of the time, with the low economic power they have, with the fact that Britain's going to come in and wipe out a good part of their fleet before Italy's first turn, you're just not going to be able to do a lot with Italy. And a lot of the videos I've seen in general on YouTube and whatnot, I think for a while the Axis were winning a lot of the games, but more recently I think the Allies have gotten the upper hand. And you can, kind of see why. If you take, if you kind of neuter Italy right from the start, Germany goes first, so they're going to take out France. That's pretty much a given. But then you've got, Russia, you've got Great Britain, and you also obviously have the United States. And in this game, Russia and the United States can both come into the war earlier. there's different conditions and whatnot compared to Global 39. So you're not going to be able to keep, as Germany, you're not going to be able to keep the United States and Russia out of the war as long as, let's say, you can in Historical Board Gaming's 39. So, I mean, you could easily, depending on how the U.S. player wants to go, if he wants to sink a lot of his resources and energy into the European side of the map, then as Germany, you've got Italy, which is basically an albatross around your neck. They're not really any kind of help. They're a hindrance. And then you've got, all of Russia on you, most of Britain, because they don't have a lot to worry about from Italy, and then a good portion of the United States. So Germany finds themselves in a lot harder situation than possibly some of the other games. And then in the Pacific, Japan, as you can kind of see, I mean, they start out with a massive Navy, massive Air Force as well. You've got fighters, tactical bombers all over the place. You got 3 fully loaded carriers spread out through the Pacific, battleships, cruisers, destroyers. So Japan definitely has a huge naval and air presence right from the jump. And then even in China, again, this is a year later, so Japan already has a handful of Chinese territories. And China's been already pushed back a little bit. Japan's got a bunch of artillery, a bunch of men, and again, a bunch of planes on the mainland. So they're able to push into China easier and with more force. But the Russians have a big presence up in on the border with Japan. So my Axis vice grip strategy on a previous video for HBG's Global 39, I don't think would be as it wouldn't be as easy to try that strategy here, because the Russians got 3 stacks of 6 men each, a couple of anti-aircraft guns. So Japan would have to put a lot, if they wanted to try to do that, to take some of the pressure off of Germany and hit Russia on a 2-front war. Japan would have to put a lot more resources into, taking out Russia in the Far East there. So I'm not sure that strategy would be as successful. And then Japan's got obviously the Far East Command and ANZAC to worry about. The U.S. has a little bit of a fleet. Most of it's off of the West Coast, over by San Francisco. They got a little bit in Hawaii itself, not a whole heck of a lot. But Japan's usually able to go hard right from turn 1. But Germany kind of gets ganged up on. So I think that in Global 40, the Allies definitely have the advantage, which maybe they should. I mean, obviously, historically, they won, so maybe that's the way it should be. But I just think your options are more limited in 1940. The later start date, the fact that, Italy kind of gets, cut off at the knees right from turn 1. So that's kind of why I've shied away a little bit from Axis and Allies 1940. Again, not to denigrate the game at all. It's still a very, very cool game, and I've had a lot of fun playing it. One of the cool things about some of the sculpts from 1940 is I think they've done, in the second edition, they've done some really cool sculpts for the anti-aircraft guns for like each country. I mean, for the Germans, you got the Flak 88s. Italy has got their own sculpts. You take a look at Russia, and then the Japanese have some like really cool AA gun sculpts. So they did a really good job with those. And the sculpts in general are really cool. Like I said, if you get the second edition, you're going to, other than France, you're going to have sculpts for each country. So that's really cool. Then over here we have Historical Board Gaming's Global War 39, and this is the game of choice for me now. This is a step up in complexity, a step up in detail from A&A's Global 40. This game we're in the middle of this one. Me and the incredible Falk from a couple of videos ago, you know that we're at the beginning of turn 6. He is playing all of the allied countries, and I'm playing the Axis. So this game is still going on. Hopefully he's over next week to be able to finish this up. So this isn't the starting setup from the game, but it still gives you an idea of, if you're comparing it to 1940, you can see that more countries are represented, which I think is really cool. You've got Axis minor powers like Romania, Finland, Bulgaria, Hungary. You've got neutral countries represented, you know, pro, allied, and Axis. So a lot more directions you could go with. The game can turn out a lot differently. There's more units in this game. We've got things like, for the Germans, you got Tiger tanks. For the Russians, you got KV tanks. You've got the SS represented for Germany in the game. You've got veteran infantry and fighters for Japan. You got Marines for the United States. You got commandos for the British. You got elite guards for the Russians, and a bunch of other ones that I can't think of offhand. But it just adds even more flavor to the game. Again, making things even that much more historically accurate. The map is a little bit bigger. More playable countries. So this is kind of where I've gotten to in my progression of games. I've been playing this now for the last couple of years, pretty much nonstop. Is Global 39. And obviously starting a year earlier, you've got, different dynamics going on. You've got Italy not yet at war, so that you're able to do more with the Italians. You're not as hamstrung as you are in 1940. So, just taking a look at this game, and this isn't always how it's going to be, and Italy is not a juggernaut by any means, but if you take a look, we're 5 turns into the game, and Italy still has a decent navy in the Med, although he has just recently started moving British ships back in. But I did have the Med cleared for probably about 3 or 4 turns, so I was collecting all that bonus as Italy. I also still have a nice force in North Africa, and right now the battle for North Africa is probably about 50-50. It could go either way. So Italy definitely is much more of a contributor in this game, and not just this particular game, but at least in my experience, I've found that Italy in general is able to offer much more of a contribution to the Axis cause, which just makes things more interesting. Someone who is playing as Italy in 1940, you don't have a lot to do. You're kind of handcuffed from the jump. Whereas at least in this game, you're not at war. You can kind of pick and choose a little bit. You get a little bit more breathing room to build up your army. Go in maybe a couple of different directions. A lot of times, not in this game. this particular one, but a lot of times as Italy, I'll be able to take out Greece. So Italy can do a lot more. And income-wise, Italy stands at $34 in this particular game. So they're still collecting a sizable income, able to still purchase, quite a few units per turn. So that's another added bonus to Global 39 is just the fact that the Italians are much more of a player in this game and makes the Axis that much more intriguing to play. And so that's where we're at in Global 39. And the last game on our tour is Historical Board Gaming's Global War 36. Now with this, and this is just, it's been a steady progression. This is at the top of the line in terms of complexity, depth to the game. And this one, obviously by starting in 1936, there is no world war going on. The only conflict we have at this point is the Spanish Civil War. Other than that, everybody is at peace. So this game really allows you to kind of change the course of history. Things could go much differently in this game, depending on, if Germany wants to be aggressive and maybe declare war earlier than historically happened in 39, or maybe later, whatever the case may be. And besides the earlier start date, again, there's even more represented in this game than even in Global War 39. China itself is broken up into several factions, warlords, who unite once Japan invades, but are kind of warring with each other prior. You've got neutral countries all across the board here in the Middle East and off down here in South America. And you have the Spanish Civil War going on, and the Germans backing Franco, as they historically did, and the Russians backing the other side. And that's really cool. Kind of gives the Germans and Russians and Italy as well can supply money and units to Franco's side, and just allows them to kind of fight a little bit of a proxy war without engaging directly with each other. And again, there's even more units represented in this game. You've got mountain infantry. You've got mountain infantry here. You've got cavalry over here. We've got torpedo boat destroyers, coastal subs. We've got major factories, minor factories. We got light, medium, and heavy tanks. We've got